Hi guys, Drew here. Today I want to talk about crystal gridding. It's something I have practiced for the entire time I have been actively on my path. I have always worked with crystals, and this is a way that I find to be very fulfilling in doing so. So I wanted to share. So first off, what exactly is crystal gridding? Essentially, this is an ancient practice of laying out stones in geometric patterns. When you hear someone talk about crystal layouts, it's essentially the same idea. You are laying crystals on or around the body. It's a grid for the body. And we can also do this for items. I could create a small grid and place the item inside. But when we talk about gridding, we're typically talking about gridding a room, an entire house, a plot of land, a larger area even. The spirit group I used to belong to one year went and gridded an entire city. Went to the four corners of the city and we gridded. So you can grid just about anything. So when we grid, we create an energetic force field that provides protection or energizes, or both, the area in question, the person, or the item. Okay, having said that, why would we want to grid? This first part here is kind of technical, so I'm going to just read from my notes because I don't want to leave anything out. So forgive me for a second. Okay, all solid matter is made up of atomic particles that form crystalline structures called lattice. So everything that you see around you is made up of these atomic particles that form these structures called lattice, crystalline structures called lattice. This structure, this lattice structure, especially as it exists in quartz, provides great stability of structure and regularity of the flow of any electromagnetic energies that move through it. So this is the reason we use silicone chips in computers for memory. It's also the reason we use quartz in watches for highly precise measurements of time. Quartz is also used in radios for stability, and it allows a greater use of the radio spectrum. So basically what I'm saying here is that crystals, quartz in particular, are capable of manipulating and amplifying energy. Okay, so why would we want that? Why would we want that manipulation or amplification of energy in these geometric forms? Crystal grids can enhance journey, meditation, channeling, our dreams if we grid our bedroom or our bed itself, and just the overall environment in general. Creating crystal grids can also ground and guard, much like casting circle, for the same kinds of things, for journey and meditation, ritual, spellcraft, astral projection, energetic healing, and shadow work. So creating a crystal grid, whether it be temporary or permanent, can create an energetic space for all of these things I mentioned, many more, and just day-to-day energetic health in your environment. Next, we would ask, how do we grid? Well, most people are probably familiar with the simplest form of gridding, which is just the four corners. Place particular stones in the four corners of your bedroom, in the four corners of your house, on the four corners of your property, as I mentioned before, the four corners of the entire city that we were gridding. And this is a very effective, simple, basic way of gridding. But today I kind of wanted to delve into some specific grids and what they are typically used for and how to create them. And for that, I'm moving into a different format. You're just going to be looking at my hands because I figured it'd be easier to show if I drew out the grids and showed you how to place the stones and talked about it that way. So here we go. Okay, so these are my lovely hand-drawn grids that you see before you. The first one is for what is referred to as the triangle grid for obvious reasons. Oh, I did want to mention, other than using specific grids that have already been created, you can use, of course, your intuition, you can use your pendulum, you can dowse for where to place crystals, And of course, guidance, if you receive guidance. There are many methods for deciding how to grid. So obviously, the triangle grid requires 3 crystals. You can choose any crystals you like to grid with. Some really basic, effective crystals to grid with would be quartz, of course. Black tourmaline is another really good one. And of course, a lot of people love to use amethyst and rose quartz and things like that, but I've used any number of stones in gridding. For this particular grid, I have chosen to use moonstone this time. I typically, specifically for specific grids like this, I like to take into account whatever it is I'm trying to achieve through the grid and choose stones that align with that. The triangle grid neutralizes disharmonious energy and it brings in harmonious energy. And while it's kind of a strange grid, you can, again, use this to charge an item. Like this small one, I could charge my little eagle pin. Or I could make it bigger around my body or someone else's body. And I would probably put the head here and the feet here and make it maybe a thinner triangle. You can also use it in a space. If there are no doors anywhere where a stone is going to be, 2 corners and then right across to make a triangle. And it could also be used on your property. I do want to mention the reason I have these little arrows drawn on here is because you will place the first stone in and then place the second stone in and then the third stone in, and then you would, just as you would cast a circle, energetically link the crystals. And it's important to finish the link, to connect them so that a grid is created. Okay, the next grid we're going to talk about is the zigzag grid. And this grid looks a bit more complicated, but don't let it overwhelm you. This, of course, requires 8 stones. And for this grid, I chose smoky quartz and amethyst. This grid is said to cure sick building syndrome and environmental energetic pollution. So for example, if you worked in a really toxic environment, and even just walking in the building or on the premises brought you down. I used to work in an environment like that, and it was definitely a sick building, and it could have benefited greatly with some gridding. So this grid, of course, you lay the first stone, the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh, the eighth, and then you energetically connect them. So the first stone gets linked to the second, gets linked to the third, linked to the fourth, to the fifth, to the sixth, to the seventh, to the eighth, and then back to the first. I'm sorry when I'm moving my hands around that the camera goes in and out of focus. I do apologize. Here we have the 5-pointed star grid. For this grid, I chose to work with amethyst point. Depending on whether you're trying to draw energy in or push energy out would designate which way the points should point. For this demonstration, I'm trying to draw energy in. I'm going to point the crystal points inward. Whereas if I were trying to push the energy out, I would point the crystals outward. This grid requires, of course, 5 stones. It is a grid of protection. You can also use it to call in love, support, and healing. That looks like a clear quartz from that angle, but it really is amethyst. Okay, so of course, you lay first, second, third, and you would want to, as always, energetically link them. Next, we have what I refer to as the Merkaba grid, although some may refer to it as the Star of David grid. I personally use this grid whenever I do shamanic journey. It, of course, requires 6 stones. And I have chosen citrine for this grid. This is a grid that can be used for protection. That is my main purpose when in Journey. But it also can be used for manifestation depending on the stones used. And that's why I have chosen citrine. I associate stones that are associated with the solar plexus chakra with manifestation. You, of course, lay the first stone, second stone, third stone, and then the fourth, fifth, and sixth. And you link first, second, third back to first, and then you link fourth, fifth, sixth back to fifth. Next we have the infinity grid, or the figure 8 grid. And this would be better suited if I could show you this way, but it's not really going to fit in the camera angle that way. So I'm just going to leave it this way. This one I would only probably use for a person or maybe an item, but I think I would only use this on myself or other people. And your head would be here and your feet would be here. This grid, as you can see, requires 10 stones. This grid is supposed to help us draw spiritual energy into our body and then ground it into the earth, creating balance. And it is supposed to ground us between source and earth, create solidity of our core energy, allowing smooth energetic changes and shifts. It's also said to allow us to channel high vibrational energies into the earth. So for this grid, we are supposed to use high vibrational stones in the top of the grid and grounding stones for the bottom of the grid. And I have just grabbed what I had handy. So I have moldavite, azestulite, pyromorphite, phenacite, Tibetan black quartz, it's a double terminated one at that, and black tourmaline and hematite. And of course, you know, your first stone you take and energetically link, making a figure 8 all the way back around. So as I mentioned, if you're working with points, make sure that they're pointed either inward or outward, depending on which way you want the energy to flow. Just like within any regular witchy practice, when gridding, if you're trying to raise energy, you would work clockwise, and if you're trying to diminish energy, you would work counterclockwise. And I want to reinforce that I personally feel, and maybe it's because I'm a witch, I don't know that people on another path would feel the same, but I do feel like if it's a temporary grid and you're going to pull it up, that is important to clear that energy, break that connection, just like you would circle, open it, clear up the energy, and deal with it appropriately, however you do so. Ground it, whatever. I will say that when I have grids in my home, I like to pull them down occasionally. In our bedroom, we have little bags like this hanging in the 4 corners, the ceiling of the 4 corners. And I like to pull them down occasionally, maybe change out the stones, but I also like to cleanse them and then re-establish the grid. The grids I have around the property, I don't worry about the cleansing. Gaia is constantly taking care of that for me, but I do like to at least once a year go out and reinforce the grid. I feel that it's important to charge it, especially since it's a long-term thing. I want that grid to be active, well, forever, but at least as long as I'm living in the home. So basically that's it. I have found gridding with crystals to be a very powerful way of creating the energetic space that I'm trying to create. Where we used to live, I had a power circle in the yard where I had put particular stones in the circle and created this sort of, I haven't done that here, although we had a fairy garden and I did chakra stones all the way around that and gridded the whole thing for, we could sit in there and for balancing chakras and just for balance and wholeness and what have you. But there are a ton of different ways that you can use grids, and I recommend it. I use them all the time, and they have greatly enhanced my path and my practice. It's just another way of connecting with crystals and working with that powerful, loving, supportive ally. Thanks for listening, and until next time, much love and gratitude.